So this session is going to be devoted to the green drivers of economic development and green economic growth in the context of megapolis development. And we have very interesting speakers and experts. And allow me, so my name is Yulkin Michael, and I represent CCGS company, which is global services in climate change, and also independent ecological organization, which is called the Center of Ecological Investments. So I, of course, am going to introduce the speakers. So let's start with the one to the left of me, which is Rob Habala, head of sustainable consumption and production of UNEP. UNEP is an ecological program of the United Nations. Ben Smith.
Nod your head. Thank you very much. People wouldn't know, okay? Thank you. Ben Smith.
So Ben Smith, head of design and planning of sustainable development economics, Great Britain. Christina Fragola, Regional Director, International Organization C40, Association of Major Cities of the World for Sustainable and Ecological Development. Natalia Karablina, Deputy Head, Communal Services Department, the City of Moscow. The experts and participants, Boris Revich, Head of Laboratory Forecasting, Health of the Population, Konstantin Trofimenko, Director, Center of Transport Problems of Megapolis, and among our experts in the first row, Yevgeny Kolbovsky, Doctor, Geography, Moscow University, and Mr. Ginsburg, Deputy Head, Science Research, Physics of Atmosphere. Well, it will take much time to tell you of all their achievements, but so our event is conducted at the background, quite a significant background, because currently there's a 20th conference of the Framework Convention on Climate Change is underway. They discuss the new agreement as of 2020 to 2030, 35, 50. So it's new climate regime for longer term. And even there are words that there's the first text already delivered. Russia is represented with a very big delegation for the first time in life. According to my estimate, 40, 45 people in the delegation, usually only 5 to 7. Quite a serious matter being discussed. Very important decisions were made by the Russian Federation authorities and first of all, the decree of the president of September 30th last year about greenhouse gases emissions reduction of 25% based on the decree, the instruction of the government number 4 of April. They have endorsed the action plan with a number of events till the end of 2016 and 17. This year already, the order of Ministry of Economic Development was issued on the methodology of indicators and concept of monitoring and verification of emissions, which for the first time in Russia will introduce the carbon reporting and accounting. The Ministry of Nature started the development of the methodology on the quantitative measures, and there's a draft of document was developed, so far being discussed, but it's out. A new initiative to expand the list of hazardous substances, including greenhouse gases. So it means, and it says that climate change is becoming the priority in ecological and economic development. So those are the issues we are going to mostly dwell upon today. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will give the floor to our speakers.
Good afternoon. As it was said, I come from United Nations Environment Program, and people used to see environment as a constraint to development. This is absolutely not true. We're working on environment for development. So environment not as a constraint, but environment as an opportunity for development. And this is how it should be perceived in all countries and cities. We have a fantastic opportunity if we manage properly our environment. I myself entered in this problem through something very specific. It took us more than 20 years to convince the global community to work on that, which is looking at our consumption and production patterns. You have no ministry in any country in the world working on consumption and production patterns. It is spread in the government. So it's very difficult to discuss about the issue. But at the end of the day, it is our production patterns and our consumption patterns that will determine exactly what we are doing in positively or wrongly, or positively or negatively. Fortunately, after 20 years of hard work throughout the world, with the regions and the countries and at local level, we managed to convince the global community of the necessity to focus on consumption and production patterns. And for the ones who have been following Rio Plus 20, there has been only one operational program adopted in Rio, which is called the 10-year Framework of Program on Sustainable Consumption and Production. It has a series of programs. All the head of states committed to that, and now they're expected to report to the General Assembly every year. And I can assure you, your government and other governments are not aware of that, and we're trying to support them to fulfill their commitment. This is one of the issues that relates to this subject. It has been clearly understood now that when we talk about economic development, environment, and so on, the first priority should be about poverty eradication. And poverty eradication is not only in Africa or in poor cities in Asia. It is everywhere. It is in the suburb of Moscow. It is in the suburb of Paris. It is in New York, as it is in Mumbai or Kuala Lumpur. So if we don't deal properly with poverty eradication, we'll have serious problems in a couple of decades. In order to be able to do that, you have to properly manage your resources, which are the basis of our economy, and which are most of the time qualified as the environment. And to undertake that, you absolutely need to see how we can change what we used to call the unsustainable patterns and transform them into sustainable consumption and production patterns. Where does this come from? We have been referring to climate change. All the discussion are going around now. We talk about 2 degrees, even though I should not say it as UNEP. I'm even conceiving 3 degrees of more, because I don't trust that we'll be really changing our consumption patterns as quickly as we should do. We have degraded our ecosystems, and we are exploiting. In 20 years from now, if we continue business as usual, we will be taking from Earth every year 140 billion tons of material to satisfy our needs. But the most important thing is the figure that you have in the middle, the 2 to 3 billion additional middle-class consumers. If those people who have the right to consume will consume like a middle-class European, I'm not taking American, a middle-class European, we don't have the resources on Earth, we will have serious problems. So we need to lead by example, by changing now, in order to have the others also changing. The cities have always been perceived as a problem, and as of today, they are a problem. But they can become an opportunity. They can become a big solution, generally speaking. If you look at it, that's what I call the industries of the 3 quarters. We did today for certain parameters, in 20 years for others. The city will be hosting 3/4 of the population. In Latin America, it will be 95%. We'll have 3/4 of the resources that will be used at city level, 3/4 of the emission, solid and liquid, and in the air pollution. But at the same time, 3/4 of the GDP will be at city level. So we cannot really consider and imagine any sustainable development if it is not done at city level. And we need to understand the fantastic opportunity that we have there. The problem is that it is always approached from a political perspective, not so much from an economic perspective. And there is a business case that needs to be done in the investment when it comes to water resources and other issues. If you look at it today, the GDP, as I said, in the cities, but more than that, the amount of savings we can do in cities from an energy and water perspective. I conducted a survey 15 years ago in more than 200 cities. I can tell you, between developed and developing cities in developing countries, we are losing between 30 and 60% of the water by mismanagement. And I don't think Moscow or other cities are better off. So losing already more than 30% of water that can go up to 60% is just a stupidity. And the same happened with the energy efficiency in buildings and so on. If we only, each one of us change our habits in the energy, we save for the city 30% of its energy bill. Imagine what that will give in terms of billions of dollars for a city and for a country that could be invested elsewhere. So we have to take it out from the political agenda, make it economic, make it social, make it human, and look at the right figures for that. But in order to approach it, the mayors, it's important for them, and the ministers involved in that, to think of the city as an enterprise. Any owner of an enterprise will have to take care about the employees, the resources that come in, how they will better manage them, what will be the benefits they will have, avoid to have a waste going out. So looking at how much you import in a city in relation to your consumption patterns. And we know if you have an income of $1,000 or $5,000 or $20,000, we know more or less how much water you need, how much energy you consume. So it will be very good to plan it. I can tell you today, there is no mayor in the world that have a dashboard like an enterprise in order to be able to manage the resources. For that, it would be extremely important for them to look at the circular economy approach by importing less resources, using better their resources so that they will have what I call less export from the city, less waste going out from the city. This new approach that we are developing in UNEP, we're trying to explain it now to government and to mayors, and to tell them you have fantastic opportunities to save resources, to better manage your resources, and move further. Of course, you need to understand it. It has been said this morning and after another session, we don't have the right information, we don't have the right data. We have perception more than performance. So we're trying to see how we can improve the research in different cities, get the right enabling framework, because once you have explained to the people, you have to tell them how to do it. You have to give them the capacity to do it. And the best thing at this level, it has been said several times, you need a platform where you can exchange between cities. And the best thing here is city-to-city peer review process, where cities with similar problems can work together. We have also gone a little bit down where you look at the buildings, because the buildings are of today. If the people have been following the climate change, in the fourth report of the IPCC, it has been said very clearly, there is one sector that can be considered as a low-hanging fruit, is the building sector. A sector where, as of today, in terms of emission, is the largest one in the world. Still, we do not have the right financial mechanism for that. We don't know how to work with it because there are so many stakeholders working on it at the same time that we just leave it easy. And there are fantastic opportunities. So we're trying to see how we move further. Just at the level of the buildings, we don't have a common metrics. We're talking this morning about metrics for a city. We don't have it even for the buildings in order to understand properly. So we developed a common carbon metrics that is now at the table of ISO that might become a global standard for you very soon. So this is also something that we made available for cities to see how they can work together and exchange among ourselves. But as I said in the beginning, we have an issue of efficiency, of economic case. It is not well at their agenda. It is not well conceived, and we have poor quality of data and the way we are moving on this issue. We don't have a systems approach in a sense that when we start working at the city level, we take it by piecemeal. We look at building, we look at transport, we look at waste. All these are interrelated. And if we don't link them properly, we can only have partial solutions that will not have the right impact you need. So you need to understand properly. Before you act, you need to know what you have. And extremely important that we understand the situation in which we are. How we move further, what are the stakeholders, what are their respective responsibilities, what they can do, how we can put them together, and how we can create public-private partnerships. Generally speaking, Government, private sector, they don't know how to work together. In fact, they are scared of each other. So we have to find a mechanism to bring them together, to work together, and try to see what are the benefits between themselves. We have fantastic opportunities. As I said, we have the 10-year framework of program. You are not aware of it. Believe me, it's getting a lot of high profile in the UN now. We have the focus that we have now on buildings and in cities. It never happened before. So we have ahead of us very good opportunities to profile the issue of buildings and cities and get support. Even Jeff is reconsidering how they can finance building and cities and so on. So the industries of what I call the industry of cities or the industry of buildings offer us a lot of opportunities. But in order to be able to do that, and this is my last slide, it's that we all talk about the right legislation, and you go at the city level or you go at the government level, you have tons of books on legislation not implemented because they have not been consulted with other people who will be implementing it. Or you have a set of volunteering mechanisms, incentives, something that you can induce people to do that. And we stop there. Most of the time, this is what I consider the 50%, by legislation and market instrument, we consider that we have done most of it. This is for me only 50%. The other 50% is information, communication, and enabling. Give the right information, get the right understanding, and enable people to do it. This is what I call sticks, carrots, and tambourine. Thank you.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. So we have newcomers to the panel. Mr. Kolbachevsky has joined us, head of land use and ecology. And I think that it would be great to continue from assessing the general challenges and rational use of resources down to the case studies. And maybe Anton will tell us what they're doing in Moscow in this respect. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I'm happy to welcome all of you in Moscow at our urban forum. Actually, the subject that I would like to cover is going to be quite a narrow thing, which is related to assessment of greenhouse gases emissions in Moscow. And you're well aware that, and it's scientifically confirmed already, that climate is changing, and everybody knows it, and scientists have proved it. But the reason for changing, one of the reasons for changing is, I think, it's greenhouse gases emissions. Again, one of the reasons, as I said, because actually there were times in history of mankind and the history of Moscow in the 17th and 16th century, when historians read those old books, the trend was then that climate started to change long before we had this notion of greenhouse gases emission. But we ecologists realized that greenhouse gases are hazardous for the atmosphere of the city. That's the aspect that changes the climate in the city, and we realized that any big city, any megapolis has its own heating background, or it's higher than the district original, and the difference of temperatures lead to many climatic processes that should be natural. They change under the pressure of the megapolis, and that's an issue. So that's why I'm going to share with you briefly about the objectives of our survey. Well, first of all, the data on greenhouse gases, according to the data of our survey, we needed for Moscow to participate in the C40 and the report on greenhouse gases emissions. And also, it's useful to develop ecological strategy of Moscow up to 2030, and also for development of action plans to implement the decree of the President of 30th September 2013 on reduction of greenhouse gases emissions. And in this respect, the department, as I again would say, has commissioned a survey on the assessment of greenhouse gases emissions in the territory of Moscow. The methodology of this assessment was developed with the account of the existing international documents. And I'm not going to name them all here because many of you don't know what they are. Well, as of 2006, Moscow is a partner of C40, with only 70 cities participating in it. As of 2011, we are in CDP on the disclosure of greenhouse gases emissions data. So we are monitoring real time. We're exchanging information on the status of the atmosphere and emissions with international organizations, and we present data. We are trusted, and the policy of openness covers not only the international organizations and rating agencies, but every citizen. Well, the global warming, again, now is recognized by the majority of the scientific community, and in 2013, the fifth report was issued on climate change, where it is reviewed as undisputable. For Russia, the average annual increase the degree of the speed of growth of average temperature is 0.43 degrees Celsius for 10 years. The fastest growth is seen in the fall and winter. The trend is seen better in summer. In summer, the warming happens in the western part of Russia, mostly. In the framework of the adaptation measures, as I said, Russia has committed, and Moscow has committed, to reduce greenhouse gases emissions up to 2020, a certain level, no less than 75% by 2020. We have to emit by 1990 of last century. And the expected implications and the risks related in Moscow, such as temperature changes or precipitation or hazardous natural disaster, can lead to aggravation or worsening of stable development. And you all realize that we have now more often the frequencies of plus and minuses. Well, of course, it cannot but impact the Moscow budget. All, the cleanliness of streets and car drivers and bicycle drivers. That's all very important. That the city should be clean for them. Well, and you all know that it's quite a big load, a big burden, and due to all those climatic changes. And we should not forget that we all remember, I'm sure, such tragic natural disasters and anomalies in the summer of 2010, when we didn't have wind for a month, and in the Moscow region, the peat was burning, and December 2010 we have ice rain. Still, we are not very well aware of the implications, but of course we realize how hazardous it was to greeneries, and I'm sure we're going to articulate the numbers quite shortly, because the survey is being finished. And as a result of this research, we have assessed the gross emissions in the city for 2013 against 1990. Well, the contribution of different sources was changed, of course, and fixed sources and the hazardous production was reduced because we put them beyond the perimeter of the city, or reorganized, reprofiled them, and car boom. All bigger cities had back in the 60s. We started it here in the 90s. In any case, there was a growth of transport of vehicles, a number, and we can see that this implication is quite dramatic. So we are actively fighting against the emissions. We are trying to solve this transport problem in Moscow, and Muscovites, I'm sure, do feel how the situation changes. Besides some banning and some restricting measures, which are not very popular very often among car users, car drivers. But despite all those unpopular decisions, we do have some progress. I'm not going to enumerate them now. It's paid parking, and as of 2nd September 2015, we're going to restrict the entry to the MCAD with lower than Euro 2 or 3. So in my perspective, that should also contribute to the greenhouse gases emission reduction. And what else I should say? Moscow is the only territory in Russia that, as of 2013, January 1st, we are selling the motor fuels and diesel and gasoline no lower than Euro 4 standard. So that's the performance for 2013, which has contributed to reduction of greenhouse gases emissions. Maybe it's just a small percentage, but still it's the beginning. This bit is a start, and we think it's our success. And also should say that as of 2007 up to 2013, the car fleet was increased by 800,000, but the emissions grew only by 2%, which proves that the events that we have here, ecological and transport, they're effective. They prove to be very effective. Presently, the city economics and the programs and the action plans were introduced and included into a number of other programs for the city of Moscow, and they are all on the slide. And to finish my presentation, here is the comparative analysis of greenhouse gas emissions in Moscow versus Russia. Totally, they are multi-vector dynamics showing, because Moscow is a bigger megapolis. And we, of course, differ very much from other territories by our share and structure of greenhouse gases. Again, to repeat, the main problem here is vehicles, and they create the lion's part of greenhouse gases emissions. And also would like to compare us, since we are here at the International Urban Forum, to compare us with other megapolises of the world. They do have some problems, some are successfully, some unsuccessfully solved, but comparing the unit emissions in number one, as we can say, goes New York City. Their emissions come up to 44,000 tons of CO2. Moscow's emissions per 1 square kilometer comparable to such cities as London, Warsaw, but by unit emissions per capita, I think Peking is leading in China, and we know why. Moscow is almost close to New York City, London, and Berlin. So in my perspective, that can bring us some optimism that the trends of the bigger cities for Moscow, we are, despite the fact that our car boom started later, still we are catching up with the bigger cities by the state of knowledge and events and information. And in conclusion, I would say that, of course, we are concerned about all those problems, and the information is all open. We've been discussing it at the Public Council and Expert Council with international organizations, environmental and local Moscow ecologists, and, of course, with the population. We're discussing things, especially, the second and third decade of November. well, was under the auspices of unfavorable meteorological conditions, and Muscovites could see that there were some problems with traffic, and we had even some smog. In any case, the challenge is there, the danger is there. So, and we, the team of the government of Moscow, will do our best to solve it at a higher international level. Thank you very much. If you are interested in our experience, we are ready to share.
Спасибо большое. Вопрос?
Thank you very much. Questions? Well, thank you. Well, I would like to, if possible, for it, well, to maybe do it, maybe something like interactive communication. One of the questions I wanted to ask is as follows. A couple of years ago, it so happened involuntarily, I was conducting an event in Arkhangelsk.
But
and it was devoted to Russian activities in the Barents Sea. And we had a good presentation from a representative from Helsinki, and he said the same thing as you did about greenhouse gas emissions in Helsinki, how they calculate them, and so on. And he said that the huge problem for Helsinki, not only Helsinki, but three smaller cities around. So the question I asked to him was about processing the data from greenhouse gas emissions from cars, and he said that they have a system that monitors all cars within the limits of the city. So I would like to ask you, what are the trends? Similar trends in Moscow. What are the monitoring systems for car traffic and greenhouse gas emissions? Thank you. So I would repeat the same thing. We are speaking about environment and try to resolve the transportation issues. And my colleagues from the transportation department, I think they would excuse me if I boast. We have a very serious video surveillance monitoring system that monitors the traffic flows, and it's not a secret. And similarly to what Helsinki did, we created our own system, and there are no problems today to calculate the number of cars that go through the city, how many cars come from other cities, other regions, how many exits exit the city limits. So for 2 or 3 years on, we have this very comprehensive picture, and it is an easy task for us to calculate how much greenhouse gas emission is there. So we know how many vehicles are driving through the city. For the environmentalists, it's a very important piece of data, since we can clearly see online, despite the fact that we have 4.5 million cars registered in Moscow, there are only 2 million riding across Moscow. So 1 million ton is the indicator. So it means that if it's 4.5 million cars, then it gives us 1 million tons of emissions. But now we are developing a new methodology of calculating. We think that if this methodology is developed and the whole thing is recalculated, we can get away from this 1 million, and this figure might be 600,000 or 700,000 tons. I think it will impact positively the atmosphere of the city, and the eco-monitoring shows that the air in the city gets better, but the fleet of cars is growing. So we managed to change the trend. Even with the old methodology, we increase the number of cars to 200, 300 per year. But now we can see that despite this fact, the trend with the pollution is getting better. We think that 930, 920,000 is the figure for today. So we changed something, but we fight for each and every percentage. So this process has an inertia, of course, but we have to change our methodologies, our approaches. We generalized this information previously, but now we get in more details. Thank you very much. So let's move on. The floor goes to Peter Doe, expert in eco-generation of power, right? Am I right?
It's a great privilege to be with you all this afternoon, and can I congratulate you for making it through to the final session. It shows your commitment to the topic, so well done for being here, and hopefully you find this session interesting. So there's three key themes, key areas I want to just get across to you today. First is that cities can develop sustainably and drive economic growth. The second point I want to make is that cities can actually gain an economic advantage by tackling their environmental emissions. And thirdly, I want to give you some examples of cities who are basically combining those two things, driving down some of their environmental emissions and also growing their economies. So let's start with a question. So, can a city develop sustainably and drive economic growth? I don't think I'd be here if I was saying no. I think the answer to that is yes. And interestingly, C40, who we've heard about already, and Christiana will talk about in more detail soon, they recently surveyed their membership, and 128 actions across C40 city members are being taken to support green economic development specifically. So why are cities taking this issue so seriously? And the reason really for that is that the failure to tackle environmental challenges has an impact on competitiveness of cities. So let's just take an illustration for a moment. So Mexico City and the issue of congestion, which again is an issue I know for Moscow too. What does congestion mean to Moscow? It means 5 million lost hours, productive hours, stuck in traffic jams, which is about 2% of the GDP of the city. It's 1 million hospital cases related to air pollution in the city, and it means that the spend is 14% of GDP on healthcare in the city, compared to an average for a city of its size, a similar city of about 9%. So not tackling environmental challenges can damage the economic competitiveness of cities too. Sorry, that's all right. And this slide illustrates some cities who've decoupled greenhouse gas emissions from economic growth. So the blue on the charts is economic growth, GVA, and here we have, and red is greenhouse gas emissions, and we have the examples of Stockholm, Copenhagen and Hong Kong. As you can see, all for about 20 years they've successfully grown whilst decoupling emissions. And at the heart of that is efficient land use and also continued investment in sustainable public transport, key to driving down air quality and greenhouse gas emissions for many cities. I just want to illustrate the importance of good planning in cities. Here we have two models of development. On the left you have Atlanta, on the right you have Barcelona. Both cities of a similar size. In fact, Barcelona is very slightly smaller, very slightly bigger, in fact, in terms of population, with 2.8 million inhabitants. And you can see the impact of density here on carbon emissions. So carbon emissions from transport in Atlanta, 10 times more than a city like Barcelona. And this point was reinforced recently. We did a piece of work with the Global Commission on Climate and the Economy, Climate Change and the Economy, using Siemens City Performance Tool. And the City Performance Tool allows cities to measure the impact of 70 different technology levers across buildings, across energy, across transport, and the impact they have on greenhouse gas emissions, on air pollution, and also on job creation in the city. So we took two identical cities, a European city and a North American city, same population, same forecasted population growth. The only difference was the density of the cities. We had the same breakdown of their emissions for greenhouse gases and also for air pollution, the sources of emissions, and we applied exactly the same levers at the same rates of implementation in those two cities. And so interestingly, this showed, unsurprisingly, that applying the same measures at the same rates in a city which needed to go further, in North America, the results were greater in terms of the total emissions reduction, but the cost of actually dealing with the problem of urban sprawl and planning was substantial. So the cost here is, I can't quite read my numbers, forgive me, 8.4 billion for the North American city compared to about 3 billion for a European city. So it's important that we plan well and we plan properly for our cities and how our cities grow. So the second point I want to come on to is around how cities are basically using the environment to drive economic growth as well. And here is the foppishly haired Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, who I want to use to illustrate this example. And one of the key objectives of the London strategy, there are four. One of those objectives is around maximising the economic opportunity from tackling climate change. He describes climate change and the green economy as an untapped green goldmine for London. Now, why does the Mayor of London say that? It's because the total opportunity globally from tackling this issue is currently worth 3.7 trillion every single year, and that's growing by about 370 billion pounds every single year towards 2030. So there's a real economic advantage which can, if you get your projects right and your programs right and you're supporting industries in your city, that city industries can take advantage of too. And just to reinforce that point, here are some figures for London. So the bar chart at the top is actually the size, the value in terms of total sales of the London low carbon environment and goods sector. And you'll see that it's grown by 5% a year consistently over the last 4 years, and it's currently worth 25 billion to the London economy. And don't forget, this is a time of economic recession in the UK also over this period. So the Mayor is clearly identifying a way to grow the city still, recognising the economic advantage of doing so. And London is reaping some of the benefits of that. And finally, just to conclude, I just want to give some examples of cities that are taking action right now. So growing economically, using projects to get up economic advantage whilst also driving down emissions. And this is a trend generally which is we're seeing across the globe. So this chart shows the adoption of sustainable transport systems, and you can see that all of the mentioned types of projects are growing in cities quite rapidly. So we now have over 200 low emission zones worldwide. We have over 160 bus rapid transit schemes worldwide and over 1,000 car sharing schemes. So first example is Medellin in Colombia. So this is a fantastic example, I think, of where a project can gain multiple wins, drive economic opportunity and also tackle some environmental challenges whilst transforming the urban landscape. So before the cable car, Medellin was the murder capital of the world. To go from a favela on the outside of Medellin to the centre took about 1.5 hours of time. That meant much of the city was isolated from the centre. Many people didn't get the economic opportunities due to that isolation. And what the cable car did was it opened up those isolated areas. So it started to tackle congestion, but it made people more economically mobile. So a journey to the centre of Medellin, instead of 1.5 hours, was taking 10 minutes. And that also encouraged growth around the actual transport hubs too. So what you found is people could also come the other way and they could access places across Medellin which were previously inaccessible. So they started to find tourists and tourism driving out further across the city too. And the overall benefit of this scheme over the last 15 to 20 years is about a 400% increase on economic activity in the city, and also a reduction in the murder rate of 80%. So you can see some real benefits from tackling, using public infrastructure to tackle these challenges, not just for the environment, but also for social and economic reasons too. Next example I want to give is bus rapid transit in Johannesburg. So this was a city who was a finalist in the 2014 C40 and Siemens Climate Leadership Awards for this very programme. They're planning to roll out 330 kilometres of bus rapid transit routes, reaching 80% of Johannesburg. And Johannesburg is a city which is deeply scarred by apartheid and is trying to build a new city. And again, it's about providing access to people who don't currently have access to economic opportunities in that area, but obviously driving other benefits around the environment too. So the estimated impact of this particular scheme is 1.6 million tonnes of CO2 reduction from the bus rapid transit, as it replaces very dirty minibus taxis in the city. And also on top of that, 75% of the jobs being created in this very scheme in Johannesburg are going to people in the taxi trade. So they're being redirected from very dirty, polluting vehicles into helping to construct and helping to operate this very scheme. Finally, an example from Detroit. And in this case, on the left-hand side, you have city planners have mapped vacant urban land in the city. All of the grey spots are basically vacant land which they couldn't figure out anything to do with. And they came across this idea of basically resurfacing a creek through the area and turning the vacant land into green space. So capturing land value, raising the land value, but also providing environmental benefit too. So in this case, resurfacing the creek means that you took pressure off the water system in Detroit. So this saves 3 billion gallons of water ending up in a wastewater treatment plant via the undergrounded creek. So again, a real good example of combining those two issues. And finally, I just want to finish with an example in India. So back in 2012, we had something called the Great Indian Outage, which was 2 days where there was no power, affecting 700 million people from Delhi through to Kolkata. And India is the third largest consumer of electricity globally and is still growing. So 25% of the country still does not have access to electricity. So there's a plan to expand the capacity by 44% over the next 5 years. But of course, in this case, there's also great losses from the existing system. Around 27% of electricity power generated is lost in transmission or it's stolen. So following the outage, Siemens were asked to develop 8 control centres in 8 cities to regulate basically the power load of the system, balancing supply and demand, whilst monitoring how the network worked. And that in itself drove down it reduced the losses by 15%. So it's not just about building new kit, it's also about thinking about existing systems and how we make them work more efficiently. Makes sense economically and it makes sense environmentally too. Okay, thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please take your seat. So, on behalf of, as the chairman.
Question before you relax. У меня вот какой вопрос.
So my question is, now we've seen from your presentation quite interesting gallery portfolio of various cities across the globe and the projects that were implemented in such cities for better sustainable development and less load on environment. So my question is, what in your perspective, what was the main motive, what was the main driver for these changes? The altruistic willingness to make life better and cleaner, or it was an economics that underpins the whole thing?
I think the answer to that varies from city to city, but I don't think it really is a competition between one or the other, because more and more cities are thinking about basically maximising the number of policies that a particular project hits and reaches. So economic development, driving down air pollution, bringing social benefits, and people are getting much smarter about joining those things together rather than kind of seeing these sorts of these measures as kind of in competition. So we choose economy over environment, or we choose social issue over the environment. So I think cities are becoming more sophisticated in how they do that. Christiana will talk in a moment about, great organisations which are bringing cities together to understand how these issues are being tackled in different places. Moscow is taking advantage of that very thing, learning from other cities, sharing their own ideas, and that's how we improve cities.
Это любопытно.
It's very interesting. It's for the first time that I hear the word competition when we speak about relations of the cities. I think, it is our future. If people understand, try and choose where to live, and they try to find a better city and cleaner city, well, it's the success factor for our future cities. Thank you very much. So from real cases, let's speak about the future of the megapolises. The floor goes to Ben Smith. Please, you're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the introduction. So it's been said already, but my name is Ben Smith. I'm a Director for Sustainable Development at the company AECOM. And I've been fortunate enough to work with AECOM in a few different cities around the world, so I will be trying to share those perspectives with you this afternoon. I have to say, though, that this is my first visit to Moscow. I've been here for about one day, so it's fantastic to hear some of the previous speakers to give us some of that real local context, which I think is so critical as we address some of the actions that have been spoken about. I'm really looking forward to the next few days to explore more around the city and to hear some more of the things which are happening here. I'll say before I start that there is actually going to be a fair bit of overlap between my presentation and some of the previous speakers, and I don't think there's any need to apologise for that. I think it's actually a really good thing. The message is quite consistent. We're starting to understand the need, the drivers, and some of the actions that we can take, and really now it's about getting on and doing some of those things. So just very quickly, what is AECOM? What do we do? I hope that many of you have heard of AECOM already, but AECOM is a multidisciplinary consultancy firm, global firm. We, at our core, are an engineering business, but we also employ architects and planners and project managers and designers and landscape designers and so on. So really offering, I guess, all of the services that you really need to think about some of these city-scale issues. We're about 100,000 people globally, 100 different offices or so. And we actually find it internally very difficult to articulate what it is that AECOM does, because there is such a breadth. And that's why we really enjoy talking about cities, because they're probably one of the only platforms where you can actually clearly say how everything that we do comes together around one place or one common challenge. And here are just some of the things that we've already heard about this afternoon, but which we really need to be thinking about as we go forward in cities. It's energy, it's water, it's waste, it's data, it's smart, it's technology levers. And it's really all of those layers coming together in a way which is coherent and makes sense, and which is right for the context of the place that we're operating in. And of course, AECOM's not the only organisation which is taking a step back and thinking about cities in this way. There are many others, and actually many of them we're collaborating with. We're going to hear a little bit more around the C40 programme in a little while. We're also taking part in the 100 Resilient Cities programme, which is championed by Rockefeller, which is looking at resilient cities, and I'll come on to talk a little bit about that more later. We heard already about the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a fantastic project which collects data from cities around the world on their actions to mitigate or reduce emissions or mitigate climate change, and also actions to address climate risks. So AECOM each year collects together all that data and synthesises that into a themed report, and I'll share with you some of the findings from that as we go through. We also contribute and take part in the private sector advisory groups. Yeah, sure. Sure. And there are many other organisations as well, UN Habitat and so on, who are thinking about cities in this way. So today I just want to talk about three things, and really it's the sort of evolution of my working life, really. And of course they're all completely related. So we're thinking first about climate mitigation, which is about reducing emissions, energy efficiency in cities, trying to slow down some of the impacts of climate change. Then, more recently, we come to think, well, actually, climate change is already happening. These risks are actually real, and we need to think about them, and we need to work out how we adapt to them. And then we think, well, actually, it's not just climate that is presenting risks to cities. Actually, it's much broader than that. There's technological risks, there's cyber risks, there's health risks. We've already heard about some of the population issues, and so on. So actually, resilience is actually broader than just climate. And so that's sort of been the evolution of the last 15 years for me. I'm going to take you through very quickly those three areas and just give some reflections from cities that I've worked in around the world. So we've already heard a little bit about reducing carbon emissions through some of the actions that we can take on energy efficiency. I think it's been pretty clearly articulated what we mean by climate mitigation. I talked already about the CDP report. And what I think is really interesting to note from that is that there's 207 cities that reported their carbon emissions through the CDP program for 2014. Only about half of them actually have an inventory of their actual emissions or understand the emissions breakdown within the cities. And that half of cities contributes this 1.2 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide each year. We've got to ask ourselves what's happening in the other half of the cities. It's really important to understand this breakdown of emissions, this context, in order to guide our actions going forward. And the graph up here just shows a comparison in emissions breakdown between Rio and Boston, which is something that was highlighted in the report. But I wanted to speak about my own experience between London and Melbourne, which is another city that I've worked in. And it was really interesting for me when I went there to understand that actually the emissions in Melbourne come from a completely different set of sources than the ones I was used to seeing in London. And the industrial sector, just as it is for Boston actually in Melbourne, or certainly to the west of Melbourne where I was focusing my efforts, is really industrial. And so the stakeholders and the people that you need to engage with to drive those emissions down are actually quite different. We need to start talking to some of the industrial, the private sector stakeholders, and understanding the levers that we can pull to help them reduce emissions. So the focus of the strategy is completely different in different places. And I think one of the previous speakers articulated this really nicely. We have to go through this process of doing the research, understanding the inventory, and then moving into the action. So I spoke then about a project that we did in the west of Melbourne for a group of councils to the west of the city centre. The centre of Melbourne is further forward. They already have a plan. They've had a plan in place for a few years now. And you're starting to see the actions that were in that plan actually starting to happen on the ground. And this is when it starts to get really exciting. So Melbourne has their 1,200 buildings programme. And they're basically looking at how they can retrofit energy efficiency measures into those 1,200 buildings throughout the city. They've set up a fund, the Sustainable Melbourne Fund, which is quite an innovative funding mechanism which is linked to the rates, council rates, so that businesses pay in Melbourne to guarantee that the repayments on the loans for the energy efficiency measures is basically guaranteed through the council tax mechanism. It's quite a clever system, and it's starting to take off there now. They've got sort of 20, 30 of these buildings that are going through this process and doing this retrofit. London, Peter can speak much more articulately about London, having been working in government before his current role. They have obviously had plans in place for some time. There's the London plan, but there's also lots of other plans around green infrastructure adaptation, around energy in particular. And from those plans, it drives lots of further activity. Before I went to Melbourne, we were looking for a project looking at what would London's energy grid look like in 2050. And it starts to really get quite interesting in trying to understand the different types of ways that it could emerge or it could evolve. And interestingly, just when I was upstairs this morning, on the big screen there, I saw a very similar visualization for another city. Just really interesting. I think this sort of visioning is very important. Cities can do this and help set the direction, help bring people along with them and encourage buy-in. So that was climate mitigation, much about reducing emissions, energy efficiency. I wanted to also acknowledge that it's happening there already. There are some risks that we're seeing. We've already heard this morning about the heat wave that was experienced here in 2010, which I was hearing about from colleagues this morning. Also in the CDP report, that picks up, or the cities report the risks that they see. And I'll just allow a minute for you to have a look at those. And I think that from what I've heard this morning, the top one there, the 78%, the temperature increase, the heat wave, is a risk that you see here. And again, much like the inventory point on the mitigation side, actually, lots of cities already have their risk assessment done. Of the risks that are reported by the 207 cities, 53% of them are seen to be serious and near term. But perhaps more striking is that over 40% of the cities don't yet have their risk assessment in terms of understanding what the climate risks are for those cities. And that's an area that we obviously need to continue to work on. So now I just have a few slides which is just going to basically run you through some of the risks that some of the cities that report under CDP flagged to us through the last year's reporting cycle. And I want to just build on some of the work, some of the things that Pete was saying earlier about this climate action also being potentially beneficial from an economic standpoint, because that was the theme of the CDP report. And what we were starting to see, what we saw for the first time this year is we looked at the data that we got back from the cities, but we crossed that over with data that CDP also collects from its business community. And it's really interesting to start to mirror up what the risks as perceived by the city governments and what's as perceived by the businesses that work there. And then actually, do we need to rethink about some of that in that context? San Francisco, you can see there, was quite concerned about disruptions from flooding and the impact that has on businesses. And there are some others here, which I can't read on the slide, but from memory, Copenhagen was around flooding, Nairobi was around droughts and the impact that has on food production and cropping. And for Manchester, this issue of urban heat island, extreme heat sort of exacerbated by the city urban form in the centre of Manchester. And I think it's interesting the different contexts you get in different cities around the world. So I mentioned already that this sort of crossover between how a city sees its risks and how business sees its risks. This graph just shows how the CDP businesses reported risks for London. And this, I think, would be interesting to the city government because they can basically stand back and say, well, actually, we're trying to attract businesses into our city. We want businesses to come here because we're resilient, because we're taking a lot of action around climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and so on. But actually, are we seeing the same risks that the businesses are seeing? And do we actually need to just tweak our risk assessment or just slightly reprioritize our action to make sure that we continue to attract that investment from those businesses? So I've talked a lot about risk, and I would just say that it's not necessarily all doom and gloom. There is actually a lot of good things that are already happening, and the CDP report really highlights that. This graphic just shows you investment in millions of dollars in a few selected cities around the world in actions which are focused on mitigation and adaptation. Also to the bottom there on the slide, just by sector. So you can see 54% of expenditure globally in the transport sector. And there are other sectors there as well, which are building efficiency, which we heard about already, and waste as well. So this is picking up on another theme that's already been spoken about today. I think whilst I've mentioned, and I will repeat, that local context is always critical, my experience of moving sort of between London and Melbourne, and there is actually a lot that is consistent, that the cities are dealing with some fairly consistent challenges, and there is actually a lot to be gained from sort of sharing learning. We developed a tool for San Francisco for their public utilities board, which basically assessed different drainage options against the sort of economic, social and environmental indicators. And as the water industry starts to change in the UK, the regulations around drainage are changing and the market is becoming more competitive, or it will do in 2016 when the regulations come into force. We see that tool as something which would be very interesting to take and speak to UK water companies, Thames Water and so on, to help them in some of the decisions that they need to make. We are looking at green infrastructure and the role that can play in the urban fabric in London. Specifically, we're looking into how we can model the benefits of green infrastructure in a buildings context, and that's both from a point of thermal performance of the building in terms of its fabric, but also the benefit it has on the microclimate and the area around the building. So we're working with universities in the UK and with the UK Climate Impacts Programme on that in London, but also with CSIRO and universities in Australia, basically looking at exactly the same thing with different partners and different scientific evidence. And the last one of these is water-sensitive urban design. Melbourne, Australia really leads the world in this, and we quite often send our landscape designers and architects to Australia to understand how they're designing these systems and to bring some of that knowledge back into projects like the ones we're doing, for example, on the London Olympic Master Plan. And then I'm moving on to city resilience. Thank you. So this is beyond now just climate risks, but really picking up some of those. So it's basically all shocks, some of which can be climate-induced, but also stresses, which can be creeping stresses. It's about population, it's about economic stability, maybe looking forward 20 years, what are the real threats to the city across the whole spectrum of risks that it can face. And we are engaged in the 100 Resilient Cities programme. I must give credit to ARUP, this is their diagram. This is the city resilience framework which underpins the 100 Resilient Cities programme. And these are just some of the sort of risks that we're thinking about now when we address resilience at city scale. And I just wanted to make the point, we've heard lots about this already, there are lots now of these forums which are looking at cities from a sort of standing back a bit and trying to sort of share lessons across them. So we're involved in the UNRCR ISDR program around their Making Cities Resilient campaign. There's World Bank programs, UN Habitat programs, 100 Resilient Cities program, there's ICLEI programs. There's lots of these things going on. Fantastic amount of information sharing, which I think is really beneficial if you can then take it and apply it to your relevant context. Resilience, of course, when you think about it, and you think about all those risks, and you think about a city and how a city runs, it can be an incredibly complex thing to try and get your head around. You need to really think about it on multiple layers and try and work out a way of bringing all of that together. It's not necessarily, it's a challenging thing to do. And all I would say is just because it's challenging is, that's not any reason not to try. And we've developed lots of tools that just pick off little segments of this. So it might be about where you put social infrastructure in schools. It might be about the one I mentioned already about San Francisco. It could be about something which is supporting C40. So we've got the curb tool for C40, which is looking at sort of rolling out a process for managing emissions in different cities. So I'll finish now. But to finish, I just wanted to say that, there is lots of tools, there's lots of organizations. There's lots of activity, data, etc. that's happening in this space. But let's not forget just the simple need for collaboration and actually the fact that forums like this are fantastic just for sharing ideas. We need to set up a framework though where people can collaborate successfully around cities, involving all the different stakeholders, partners and so on, because it's in all of our interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Before getting over to the last speaker, I would like to use the presence of great experts and specialists in the audience and maybe address some of the questions to them. I think it's high time to clarify some of the subjects that were covered in the presentation. So Boris is here, so I would like to ask him about the real assessment of climate change on impact on health. Are there any assessments or evaluations like that? Are there any strategies in the Moscow region, for instance, related to those things? Well, I can say as a member of the health group, PCC health group, in our reports year on year, well, this section is becoming bigger, the section that's related to the health impact, and a very tough selection is done. Whatever is published in the world, well, it's growing dramatically. There's no country in the world that's not been concerned about this problem. Well, some problems for the recent 2 decades filled with new content. One of the main subjects is the development of scenarios, of climatic medical scenarios, for instance, on malaria, on encephalitis. And malaria problem is quite a burning one for many of our regions because of higher density. And there are a lot of ants, and we have unpleasant outbreaks of different fevers in the south of the country, and encephalitis. Well, it's growing in Czech Republic, in Russia, in Sweden. It's going north, and quite new areas are appearing we didn't have before. For instance, impact on what's called mental disorder. I mean, the psychological, neurological, and mental disorders. So Moscow in 2010 provided us quite a sad example to the whole world of unbelievable event of the heat wave that lasted 44 days. All records hit for the city, 11,000 additional deaths. Well, that's economic damage that we had, well, because we're speaking about losses and risk. And economists calculated and published several billions of dollars, because a lot of capable people, not only senior citizens, because our colleagues in Great Britain love this subject. They mostly are talking about the loss of senior people. But in Moscow, quite able, not very old people died, and we lost on gross product. So since we are speaking about the action plans and what was achieved and done, it was quite a tough lesson learned for the Moscow government that that drew good conclusions, and they developed an action plan for Moscow, because it was clear that you'd better invest some money to create a system of early warning, meteorological early warning system, for us to be aware when heat is coming, when this heat wave is coming, for all the city infrastructure to be ready. And I should say that they demonstrated full understanding. For instance, if before that, when I visited Department of Healthcare and showed them a great Bloomberg plan for New York City, or our British colleagues' publications, they didn't understand what I was talking about. And when it was 40+ degrees in Moscow, and people were just running out of the city happily, the authorities realized that they had to do something. And the intersectoral plan that was recommended by IPCC, and everybody was involved then, material resources assessed, and it turned out that it's not that expensive. But if you do it reasonably and right, for instance, this year, when though there was some news that such a heat wave might come, there was a meeting of all departments in the authorities, and I would even those that might be quite far from this, for instance, mass communication department, which seemingly is very far from the problem, for them to be able, with their press releases or booklets, for them to have necessary information on electronic tables and in the subway and trolley buses, buses for the social centers, to be ready with their cool rooms and air-conditioned rooms, as Paris showed us several years ago when they had that well-known, famous heat wave of 2003. And there were volunteers, medical volunteers. They visited senior people with chronic diseases. They visited them to help them. So the mechanism was well developed, and there's great hope now that other cities will be covered. But I think that now the objective is to disseminate and circulate this experience. And I would address Mr. Kolbachevsky, who is here. So we should do something about it. He left. Okay. Okay, well, what we have to do is to disseminate this Moscow experience over to other cities, because unfortunately other cities are not very well aware of it, and they have to publish this information for them to understand that they should do it specifically in our Russian conditions and not somewhere there. Thank you very much, Boris, but you deprived me of an opportunity to answer another question. Okay, let's get over to the last speaker, Christina Fragola, C40.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to be brief because I know you have endured a very information-packed day here, and you might be ready for some vodka. So let's see how this works. Okay, great. My name is Cristiana Fragola, and I'm the European Regional Director for C40, and I want to thank my predecessor here, particularly Pete Doe and Ben Smith and Mr. Kolbachevsky, who mentioned already the organization a few times. And on that note, I really want to thank the City of Moscow for organizing this and inviting us here. So C40, what is it at last? C40 is an organization of mayors, led by mayors, to tackle climate change and fundamentally make cities more resilient. It was created in 2005 by the then mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, and originally, believe it or not, it was just 20 cities. And since then, it has been expanded both by President Bill Clinton with his Clinton Climate Initiative that merged with C40, and then by the former mayor of New York, Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Our current mayor is also in this picture. You actually see former Mayor Bloomberg and our current chair, Mayor Page, together in Rio. So our current chair is Mayor Page of Rio, and you see here several of our mayors gather in a summit that we do every 2 years. I'm glad to report that since 2005, we have grown a bit, and we're currently 70 cities around the world and growing. And of course, we can't change our name every day, so we're C40 for now. But stay tuned. One day we may be C100. So why cities? Why cities are that important? Well, first and foremost, and you heard this information in different formats today, but fundamentally, cities, but especially megacities, which is the majority of C40 memberships, are really hosting the majority of the world population, and this is going to increase even more. By 2050, 70% of the world population will live in megacities. So currently, we do represent 1 in every 12 of you. 1 in every 12 human people in this planet live in a C40 city. That's the equivalent of 8%, which would be the US and Brazil combined. Currently, 5% of the world emissions are represented by C40 cities, and that's the equivalent of Japan. And currently, and this is more to the topic of this conference, 21% of the world economy is represented by C40 cities, and that's basically the equivalent of China. So as you can see, the coalition of cities collaborating together can really bring significant results to tackle climate change, and as my predecessor have already proven, also to support and sustain economic growth. So we do work very closely with some of the partners you've seen here, including the CDP and Siemens, but particularly this slide refers to the CDP and Arab collection data that we do every year, and this report is published every 2 years, which precisely lists all the actions that our mayors and their city staff undertake. And why do we care about this? Because the point being that mayors do have the power to act. They actually have the power to act in a lot of the emission sources that affect climate change and that do also promote economic growth. So as you can see there, obviously building regulation is a key area of action, but transit and city street and parking that has been so much mentioned for Moscow Climate Action Plan is very much at the top of the mayoral opportunity to take action. So what C40 really does is certainly helps to gather information about what mayors do right, but also helps city officials, and there are some wonderful staff members here of Mr. Kolbachevsky office with whom we do collaborate, and so it helps city officials to exchange knowledge, to figure out how to solve problems, to figure out how not to repeat problems and mistakes. And so we have actually networks that help city officials in a very trusted environment with no press, no outside consultant to share their stories, as I was saying, and tackling priorities and challenges together. We also provide on-the-ground support, and we provide direct resources through a competitive process, city advisors to our cities. Then there is a regional director like me in every one of the world's 7 regions. And then, as I was saying, former Mayor Bloomberg has been our chair for 3 years, and he's notorious for saying, "In God we trust, everyone else brings data." And so we have a very strong research and knowledge management team We do publish these reports, both with CDP and with Arup, and we also, though, have started to release customized reports for our cities, which Moscow will receive soon. In addition to that, I also want to emphasize we have a strategic partnership with Siemens, who is part of our research and measurement and planning initiative. And with Siemens also, we help some selected cities, such as Moscow, to provide suggested guidelines in their effort to develop climate action plans. So here is an example really of how a network works for those of you who are visually creative. Basically, we bring the world together to tackle problems, as I was saying, and sharing solutions. So, you know, some networks will focus, and I will go into that in a detail, but you see here a couple of questions based on some of our cities' experience. Some cities in Latin America join forces to tackle better terms for hybrid bus contracts and procurements. Other cities, such as London, Vancouver, Toronto, New York, join hands to understand how to engage the private sector in energy building retrofits. We have a very strong adaptation network where a lot of cities share challenges there as well. These are our 6 initiative areas with the related networks. You can read, so I'm not going to indulge. But fundamentally for Moscow, we're sorting out, and we're still in the process of developing the work plan with Mr. Kulbachevsky and some other, thank you, some other department staff. But the key priority that are emerging are, of course, transports, energy, green growth, and waste. Energy, we shall see, maybe it won't last. But as you can see, our transport and transportation is a key area. We have 3 existing networks here, and actually a 4th one has been just launched, the Transport or Demand Network, funded in part by the Ford Foundation, and I do think that that could very much help Moscow to manage some of these transport planning challenges that we heard earlier. And then I wanted to indulge here a little bit in some data, just because it speaks to the theme of this convening. So a lot of you may have heard already today the new climate economy report. You know, by 2030, about 500 cities will be responsible for fundamentally 2 things: 60% of GDP and 50% of greenhouse gas emissions. So guess what? As Pete Dow showed earlier and as Ecom showed earlier, the 2 can be uncoupled. And in fact, we have several C40 cities that are already doing that and are showing how sustainability can actually not only foster growth, but also foster direct investment and private investment. Copenhagen is a kind of a leader in this. What is Copenhagen not a leader on? I still have to figure out. But in any event, they realize that investing in just €500 million will generate and leverage 3.25 billion in euros. Joburg just issued a green bond that will finance a lot of its sustainability initiatives, including some on transport, and they issue a green bond of approximately 140 million. The Green Bond Alliance is also a partner of C40. Stockholm, similarly, also just issued a green bond. London, we heard a lot about. I think the only interesting thing here we do need to know is that even London is a believer that green is green. 25.4 billion euros is the size of the London carbon economy, low carbon economy and green service sector. And so several of our cities belonging to the Green Growth Network have actually just commissioned a report to scope the size and the benefits of the green economy. This is the Energy Initiative and their networks. We heard a lot about buildings from the colleague from UNEP, and indeed, through our report and data collection, building does consistently show up as a major emission source, particularly for developed cities, and surprise, surprise, it's a key issue in Europe. So our private building and municipal building networks are some of the most popular. Then there is a solid waste initiative that has 3 networks. Moscow participated in the workshop that we hosted in Milan in October for the Waste to Resources Network, which is very much focused at identifying ways to not only minimize waste, but really to use waste as gold, as an asset, as a resource, as a financial stream. And then last but not least, a lot of this research, and I think is pivotal here, we heard this morning mayors speaking with some national government. This is becoming more and more part of the solution for the COP21 that will be hosted next year in Paris. The COP20 is going on right now in Lima. So in light of this, C40 has teamed up with ICLEI and UCLG, and we have developed a global standard for greenhouse gas inventory. As Kolbaczewski was demonstrating earlier, it's critical to start with a good inventory if you're really serious about tackling climate change. And we work very closely with this organization to develop a consistent inventory for cities throughout the world. And we're now inviting, through this initiative called the Compact of Mayors, all mayors to adopt this methodology, report their emission reduction targets and their progress in order to really demonstrate to national government how cities and mayors can really provide tangible solutions, and in order also to attract more capital flow to these cities. And so, you know, this is just another example of how this Compact of Mayor cities have been assessed, and fundamentally already 228 of them have climate targets. And here you see an interesting number. The cumulative savings of these cities by 2050 would be the equivalent of the emissions that are currently being emitted by China and India. So last but not least, C40 also has a very extensive communication department, and we also each year have the Climate Leadership Awards in collaboration with Siemens. We just hosted one in New York City in September. So for those who were doubting about cities competing, the truth is there is such a thing as a healthy competition. It's a great thing. We see extraordinary examples of city leadership emerging from them, and I hope you would all be at our next Leadership Awards with Siemens in Paris next year. And that's all for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that was a good addition, not only to compete, but also to exchange experience, not to repeat mistakes. Well, that's the time is up. Thank you very much for your contributions. If you have some comments or questions, you're welcome. Thank you. Alexander Ginsburg.
Yes.
Well, in this case, the public chamber of the city of Moscow, and I represent. I would like to revisit the name of, or the subject of our event, ecological drivers or projects as a drivers of economic growth. And I would like to, I brought specifically a book that was published 5 years ago in Germany. It is called The Long Road to Arena. So it gives us great examples. When Germany, for private households, gave them an opportunity to provide electricity, if it is, you know, different recycle energy, well, 5 times more expensive that they get from the grid. And this and in 5 years, they became equal, the ecological driver of economic development in renewables, and for the sources and for the devices. Well, it did work, and there are some surprising examples for the renewables. But the recent couple of years, we try to, for the 2nd year running, we conduct a contest, Energy of Knowledge. So that's a competition among the students of different universities on the projects on renewable sources in urban conditions. And when we thought that no one would come for the 2nd year, well, it turned out that even more people came. So it means that there is a demand, and such ideas as, for instance, buying renewables more expensive than the market price, and such contests for the younger people, and some other projects, and the green energy. Anton, unfortunately, didn't have time to say that, but in his slides he had it, that they are developing now the ecological strategy of Moscow up to 2030. And that strategy should have, as a result of our seminar here, all those ecological drivers of sustainable development of Moscow and other cities. Thank you. Thank you very much. Colleagues, thank you very much for your participation, for your contribution, to the speakers and experts for their contribution. Thank you very much. See you.